I opened the door and immediately knew something was off. Two police officers claimed I had broken the law and needed to pay a fine. But the moment I pulled out my phone and stated my job title, their faces turned pale. They tried to run, but it was already too late. What happened next was something they never saw coming. David Carter was a man who understood the nature of fear. 20 years as a district prosecutor had taught him to read people, detect lies in the smallest facial twitches, and spot deception where others saw only confidence. He knew how criminals acted when they felt power, and he knew exactly what it looked like when someone only pretended to have it. So when a loud, insistent knock echoed through his house, there wasn't a shred of anxiety in his chest, only cold focus. "Open up! Police!" came a voice, unnaturally strict, as if the speaker was trying a little too hard to sound authoritative. David exhaled slowly, collecting his thoughts. He wasn't expecting visitors, and certainly not the police. Soft light illuminated the hallway as he stepped toward the door. He hesitated for just a second before pulling it open. Two men stood in front of him. The first was broad-shouldered, stocky, with a shaved head. A badge dangled on his chest, but the metal looked too light, too polished, not like the real thing. The second was lean, sporting a thick mustache and a tense gaze that scanned David from head to toe, as if calculating how easy it would be to intimidate him. "Mr. Carter." The mustached man slowly pulled out a notepad, the gesture exaggerated, almost theatrical. "You are accused of illegal construction on your property. We've received complaints." David's face remained unchanged, but something inside him clicked. "Complaints?" he repeated evenly, his stare drilling into the man. "Yes, your structures violate HOA regulations," the bald one interjected. "We'll have to issue you a fine." A fine. There it was. A brief pause. David gave the slightest tilt of his head as the full picture came into focus. They weren't even trying to sound official. No documents, no warrants, just tone, presence, and the absolute certainty that fear would do the rest. This scam worked on regular homeowners, people who didn't know the law and avoided confrontation, but not on him. David took half a step forward, looming over them, as if cracking their entire script in two. He had seen men like this before. He had put them behind bars, and these two had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. David Carter knew how con artists played their game. He had seen them stumble over their words, search for excuses, and desperately try to wriggle out when they felt control slipping through their fingers. But the worst kind of opponent for them was a man who showed no emotion. "All right." He crossed his arms over his chest, his voice cold, almost indifferent. "Then let's do this by the book. State your name, rank, and badge number." The bald man blinked. For a moment, his face seemed frozen, waiting for the right answer. His eyes flickered ever so slightly toward his partner before he finally forced out, "Officer Brown." "And you?" David slowly shifted his gaze to the mustached one. "Officer Harris," came the response, but the voice wasn't as confident as it had been a second ago. David nodded in silence. With a practiced motion honed by years in the courtroom, he pulled out his phone. The soft click of the recording starting shattered the quiet evening. "Excellent." The camera was aimed directly at them. "So, Officers Brown and Harris." He deliberately repeated their names, making them linger in the air. "You're accusing me of illegal construction and demanding a fine. Do you have a warrant or an official order?" Silence. Stocky Brown tensed his shoulders as if preparing to stand his ground. Harris averted his eyes, his false confidence vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "Why are you recording?" His voice turned sharper, as if trying to regain control. David tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing coldly. "Because what you're doing is a crime." He let the words settle, hanging thick in the air before continuing. Impersonating a police officer and extortion. The bald man swayed slightly backward, as if considering stepping away but thinking better of it. Listen, mister, let's not make this difficult. Harris tried to force a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. We just need you to pay the fine, and everything will be fine. David took a step forward, not threatening, not aggressive, just a step. But it was enough to make the air between them heavy. That's called a bribe. His voice remained even, but there was steel beneath it. And I'm not just a lawyer. He gave them a second to absorb his words. I'm the district prosecutor. A dead silence fell. Harris went pale as a sheet. Brown straightened up abruptly, his fingers clenching into fists as if his body instinctively prepared to run. Now they understood. Now they were truly screwed. The bald man shot a quick glance at the mustached one. David Carter knew that look all too well. He had seen it in the eyes of hundreds of defendants, people who clung to the hope of escape until the exact moment they realized there was no way out. They were caught. We just wanted to handle this quietly. Harris muttered, his voice softer now, drained of its former confidence. Handle it quietly? David stepped forward, deliberately closing the distance. Then stay right where you are. He raised his hand and pressed the call button. I'm calling the police. Click. Dial tone. Harris flinched. The bald man took a sharp step back, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal searching for an exit. No, wait! Hey, let's not take it that far! Harris's voice trembled, but he was still trying to hold his ground. David didn't blink. We're already there. He saw them break. The bald man cursed under his breath and suddenly made a sharp move. His notebook full of fines slipped from his fingers and landed on the ground with a dull thud. He spun around and strode toward the car without looking back. Harris hesitated, his fingers clenching and unclenching as if searching for some last-ditch solution. But there was none. He hurried after his partner. Stop! David barked, but they were already running. Panic had taken over, but they didn't get far. As if fate itself had intervened, a patrol car rounded the corner. Red and blue lights flared against the evening darkness, flooding the street with an urgent, ominous glow. Officer! His voice cracked through the air like the snap of a whip. He threw up his hand, pointing straight at the two fleeing frauds. These two were impersonating police officers and extorting money. The real patrol officer reacted instantly. Stop! Hands up! His voice was like a thunderclap, commanding, absolute, the kind that bypassed thought and struck straight into instinct. The bald man froze as if lightning had hit him. He tried to stop too suddenly, his legs buckling beneath him, nearly sending him sprawling onto the pavement. Harris hesitated for a fraction of a second. His instincts still screamed, "Run!" But the moment he saw the officer yank out a pair of handcuffs, all his resolve drained away. This is a mistake. We were just... But words no longer mattered. Click! Steel cuffs snapped shut around the bald man's wrists. Click! Harris flinched as the cold metal clamped down on his own. Now they were trapped. A brief but weighty silence settled over the scene. David stood motionless, watching as the two were loaded into the patrol car. He had witnessed this moment 1,000 times in the courtroom, but this time it was happening right in front of him. Panic, fear, frustration, anger. He saw a storm of emotions flashing through the fraudster's eyes. But underneath it all, one simple truth was settling in. There was no escape. And David knew that realization was crashing down on them with full force. But he felt no satisfaction in their downfall. He felt something far more important. Because today could have ended differently, but it ended the way it should have. Justice was served.